Okay, so in this video I'm going to go through one part of the example application in a bit more detail and try and explain what is happening now. I'll be breaking this down into uh, there'll be other videos coming along to explain other parts of the application, and on this one I'm going to take a look at the event loop. So here we have our example application again, um, and this is the block diagram. Now the application follows a pattern called a queued message handler, and that is it's effectively a design pattern that LabVIEW has, and it allows for multiple parallel loops to run simultaneously, um, and for interactions between them to occur, so that we can interact with a running application. It can keep on running, and we can use events to try and drive that application forward through what is essentially a state machine. So the two parallel loops in the queued message handling pattern consist of the event loop and they call it the message processing loop. I've extended this with a results handling loop, but we will come on to that in a future video. And so essentially what happens is events occur, and this loop is picking them up, and when it detects an event it's interested in, it puts a message onto a message queue, and this loop here is listening to that message queue, and when a message appears, it takes it off and it processes it through this state machine here. And I'll come on to this in more detail, this main processing loop, message processing loop, in a future video. But for now, I just want to concentrate on the event processing loop. So here, when the application runs, we've set up the framework that is creating two global variables. The set of the events that the application is interested in, both the user application as well as the framework, and also the message queue. So the events the events that I'm particularly interested in is the stop event, and that can get raised by the framework when it's finished processing what it is being asked to do. There's also the notifications message queue, and that is a queue that I put messages on to help drive the application forward and the framework to do its work. So we register for the stop event. This loop here it's a while loop, and it just continuously runs, and inside we have this event structure. An event structure, we defined the events that we're interested in. Now in this particular application, you can see a whole list here, action 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. We don't do anything with those. If you remember, they relate to the buttons here, so that although the code is geared up within this application, we're not going to do anything with it. Action button 1 is now called get ID. When you change the wording on the buttons, it happens here automatically. And so we're interested in both the stop value change, so the stop is a stop button, so we're interested when that value change, i.e. it's been pressed. We're also interested in the user event which is raised by the framework, and is what we've registered for here. Programmed up the pause and resume buttons, although as they're not used in this particular application, and there's a refresh event as well, and that's tied to this refresh button. So what happens is this loop is running, it's waiting for an event to occur, and let's say we've pressed get ID. So it recognizes that get ID, the value has changed, and that is enqueuing a message. It's putting a message onto this notification queue called action 1. You'll note, and this notification queue is also running within this main processing loop here. So by enqueuing a message here, it will appear in the queue, and this loop here will dequeue it and then process it. In this case, it would go to action 1, which is where we do stuff. The other things, if we look at the stop button, if we detect that the stop button is pressed, I actually raise the stop event. So the framework can raise it and my application can raise it. It's the same event, and it's why we set it up as globals, because obviously we don't, it's going to be too much. It's just not feasible to be passing these events through all these wirings, through all the subfiles that go on. So you raise the stop event, and from this particular event handler, and that will ultimately end up within this event handling routine here, which is where we're enqueuing the message stop. So enqueue the message stop, and it's picked up then by the message handling routine. At the same time, because we are stopping, we stop this loop. Well, there's nothing more to process in this loop here, and so it can terminate. Now obviously by terminating there's going to be no more events occurring, or that we're going to be listening out to, and the message handling loop will also come to a stop as well, because when it reads the stop message here, it will action that and exit. So the event handling loop then, we've got refresh, that's adding the message to refresh, again it'll be handled here. Pause, we're raising an actual pause event. Now the difference between putting a message on the queue and raising an event is once the framework is running and processing the commands that it's asked to do, it needs to run through that and finish. So once it's running within the main processing loop, we won't be able to read any more messages until the framework is finished. However, the framework is listening for these events, so when the framework hears the pause event, it can pause. And it's the same with the resume. When it hears the resume event, it can carry on. It's just the way the queued message handling pattern works. And generally, once code is running, it needs to run to an end. So if we look within the action one, we're running the interaction, and that has to run to the end before we exit out of this block, and we can loop back around again to get any messages. I'm hoping that makes some sense. And it's just really just a distinction between raising events and sending message. When I send a message, I know that it can be handled straight away. When I send an event, I know it's because the application will be running, and it's the application as it's running that I need to interact with. And these other events here are all related to the action buttons that are on the front panel, although we don't use them in this application here. They are all geared up to drive a message into the main processing loop. So it's really, you can just drag them out, make sure they're no longer hidden when you run them, and tie them. If you rename it like I've done with getID, this value here will change automatically, so at least within the event handling loop you will know what you're looking at, and it's tied into the action 2 here, and you would put in the code that you want to actually prepare for the interaction, and then it can run in this section here. I'll come on to the main processing loop in the next video. Anyway, once this has finished, once this has finished, we will come out, the loop will stop, and we'll go into any error handling. If there's errors that have come through, we'll go into any error handling. We unregister for events, so we're now tidying up the application so it closes down neatly, and we destroy any global variables here. And then that essentially is the end of the application as we've asked it to run. It'll still be sort of active. I could ask it to do getID again to actually stop it completely. We press the stop button. So that's the event handling loop. It's UI events and it's framework events that it's handling, and its main purpose is to either send events into the running interaction process, so the commands and command directors that are executing here, or to send messages to drive the state machine that the framework operates under. In the next video I'm going to come on to this in more detail.